The alarm bells echoed through the massive crystal halls of the Galactic Council Station, their haunting melody designed to be understood by 47 different species. For the first time in 300 years, an emergency session had been called, and the reason made even the most ancient delegates tremble with fear. Humanity had escaped. Ambassador Roth pressed his scaled hands against the smooth surface of his podium, his mind racing through the implications of what they had discovered. The quarantine barriers that had contained the human species for 20 years had been shattered, not by brute force or clever technology, but by something far more terrifying. The humans had simply decided that the barriers no longer applied to them. "The energy readings are impossible," announced Commander Nix, his blue skin shifting to deeper shades as stress hormones flooded his system. The containment field around the Sol system required the combined power output of 12 star systems to maintain. The humans didn't destroy it or disable it, they made it irrelevant. The chamber filled with the sounds of distress as delegates from dozens of worlds struggled to comprehend what they were hearing. The Corvan representative, a creature whose compound eyes could see across 17 different spectrums of light, clicked his mandibles in rapid succession. "Explain how a barrier becomes irrelevant. Either it exists or it does not." Nix activated the holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. The three-dimensional image showed the Sol system as it had been just days ago, surrounded by the shimmering energy barriers that had kept humanity contained. Then the image shifted, showing the system as it appeared now. The barriers were still there, still functioning perfectly, but somehow the humans had moved beyond them without breaking through. "According to our best analysis," Nix continued, his voice barely steady, "the humans have developed technology that allows them to exist outside the normal parameters of space and time. They didn't break the quarantine, they transcended it." The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. If humans could manipulate the fundamental nature of reality itself, then every assumption about warfare, defense, and survival in the galaxy would need to be reconsidered. The species that had been deemed too dangerous to integrate into galactic society had become something beyond their ability to control or contain. Dr. Vala, the galaxy's leading expert on consciousness studies, stepped forward with her preliminary report. Her crystalline form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that indicated extreme concern. "The energy signature from the human vessels suggests something unprecedented. They appear to have weaponized consciousness itself, turning thought and will into a form of energy more powerful than anything we've encountered." The silence that followed was deafening. Consciousness had always been considered the final frontier, the one aspect of existence that remained beyond the reach of technology. If humans had found a way to harness it as a weapon, they had moved beyond the realm of conventional species into something entirely new. "We have reports from the outer monitoring stations," continued Nix, his voice growing weaker with each word. "The human vessel approached our observation posts and disabled them without firing a single weapon. The crews reported that their ships simply stopped working, as if the very concept of technology had been temporarily removed from their minds." Ambassador Roth felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden. The Galactic Council had been formed to prevent exactly this kind of scenario, where one species developed capabilities that threatened the balance of power in the galaxy. They had protocols for dealing with aggressive species, expansionist empires, and even cosmic threats, but nothing in their vast databases addressed how to handle a species that had transcended the normal rules of existence. "What are our options?" asked a Thulian delegate, her forearms gesturing in patterns that conveyed both urgency and resignation. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The traditional responses to a dangerous species were containment, negotiation, or elimination. Containment had already failed spectacularly. Negotiation seemed impossible when dealing with beings who could rewrite reality on a whim. That left only one option, and the thought of it made every delegate in the chamber feel sick. "The combined fleet," Roth said quietly, his words carrying the weight of inevitability. "We mobilize every ship, every weapon, every defense system from every member species. If humanity has become a threat to galactic civilization, we have no choice but to respond with overwhelming force. The debate that followed was unlike anything in the Council's history. Species that had been allies for centuries found themselves arguing about the ethics of launching a preemptive strike against a species that had done nothing more than escape confinement. Others argued that humanity's very existence now represented a threat to every other form of life in the galaxy. The Valaxian representative, whose species had been instrumental in establishing the original quarantine, stood with trembling limbs. We created this situation. We decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to develop freely, and our interference has led to this moment. Perhaps we should consider that we brought this upon ourselves. But fear overrode guilt, and the vote was unanimous. The combined fleet would be assembled, representing the largest military force in galactic history. 3,000 ships from 30 different species would converge on the Sol system with one purpose: to end the human threat before it could spread. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, each returning to their homeworlds to prepare for war, none of them noticed the small probe that had been observing the proceedings from the shadows. The device was unlike anything in their databases, its surface seeming to shift and flow like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. The probe recorded everything, transmitted the data across impossible distances, and then dissolved into nothingness as if it had never existed at all. Somewhere in the Sol system, humans were watching, learning, and preparing for the confrontation that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The age of human containment was about to end, one way or another. The morning sun cast long shadows across the streets of New Geneva as President Maya Torres walked through the crowds of people who had gathered outside the Global Defense Headquarters. Their faces showed a mixture of determination and fear, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or was crushed under the weight of galactic authority. Inside the massive complex, the most important meeting in human history was about to begin. The room was filled with representatives from every nation on Earth, but their attention was focused on one man who sat quietly at the head of the table. Captain Alex Reed looked ordinary enough with graying hair and tired eyes, but everyone in the room knew that he commanded the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created. "The alien fleet is massive," reported General Stone, pointing to the holographic display that showed the approaching armada. "Our long-range sensors count over 3,000 ships from at least 30 different species. They're bringing everything they have." The numbers were staggering. The combined firepower of the alien fleet could destroy entire star systems, reduce planets to cosmic dust, and eliminate all trace of human civilization in a matter of hours. Against this overwhelming force, humanity could field exactly one vessel, and many in the room doubted that even their greatest achievement would be enough. "What about the home fleet?" asked Admiral Park, gesturing toward the display showing Earth's orbital defenses. 12 ships isn't much, but they're our best." Reed shook his head slowly, his expression calm despite the magnitude of the crisis. "Our conventional ships would be destroyed in the first few minutes of any engagement. The Defiant was built for exactly this scenario. One ship, one crew, one last chance to prove that humanity deserves to exist." The used Defiant had been humanity's greatest secret, a project that had consumed the resources of the entire planet for the past decade. While the aliens had kept them trapped in their own solar system, human scientists had made the most important discovery in the history of consciousness studies. They had learned that thoughts, emotions, and will could be transformed into a form of energy more powerful than fusion, more versatile than antimatter, and more dangerous than any weapon ever conceived. "Captain," said Dr. Lisa Chun, the lead scientist on the Consciousness Project, "the neural networks are showing unprecedented activity. The entire human population is somehow connected to the ship's systems. Every person on Earth is contributing to the vessel's capabilities." Reed nodded, understanding the implications better than anyone. The Defiant wasn't just a ship powered by consciousness energy. It was the physical manifestation of human determination, powered by the collective will of 8 billion people who refused to accept defeat. Every human on Earth was connected to the vessel through quantum entanglement, their thoughts and emotions feeding into a network that transformed raw consciousness into reality-altering power. "The aliens made a mistake when they quarantined us," Reed said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made everyone in the room straighten in their chairs. "They gave us 20 years to prepare, 20 years to develop technology. They can't comprehend in 20 years to unite as a species? They're about to learn what happens when you corner a species that conquered its own planet through sheer stubbornness." The Defiant itself was unlike any ship ever constructed. Its hull was composed of materials that existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously allowing it to phase in and out of normal space at will. Its weapon systems were powered by human consciousness, capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics on a localized scale. Most importantly, it was crewed by volunteers who had undergone the consciousness integration process, allowing them to interface directly with the ship's systems through thought alone. "Sir," reported Commander Walsh from the tactical station, "the consciousness matrix is showing full integration across all human population centers. The ship's capabilities are increasing exponentially as more people join the network." Reed smiled for the first time since the crisis began. The aliens had studied humanity for decades, analyzing their technology, their psychology, and their potential for development. But they had missed the most important aspect of human nature, the ability to transcend limitations through collective effort. When humans worked together toward a common goal, they became something greater than the sum of their parts. "What are your orders, Captain?" asked President Torres, her voice carrying the authority of Earth's unified government but also the humility of someone who recognized that the fate of the species now rested in the hands of one man and his crew. Reed stood, his uniform bearing the insignia of the United Earth Space Force, an organization that had been created specifically to defend humanity against galactic threats. "We're going to do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We're going to prove that we deserve to exist, and we're going to do it in a way that no alien species will ever forget." The launch of the Defiant was witnessed by every human on Earth through the consciousness network. They felt the ship's engines come online, powered by the combined will of their species. They experienced the moment when the vessel phase shifted out of normal space, becoming something that existed between dimensions. And they shared the determination of the crew as they headed toward the largest military force in galactic history. As the Defiant approached the alien fleet, its hull began to exhibit properties that defied conventional understanding. Energy patterns danced across its surface in colors that had no names in any language. The ship seemed to grow larger and more imposing with each passing moment, not through any physical change, but through the increasing focus of human consciousness upon it. "Captain," Walsh reported, his voice filled with awe, "the ship is responding to our thoughts before we even give orders. It's as if the boundary between human consciousness and the vessel has disappeared entirely." Reed nodded, feeling the truth of those words in his bones. The Defiant had become more than a ship. It was humanity's answer to the galaxy's ultimatum, a declaration that some species could not be contained, controlled, or eliminated. The aliens were about to learn that they had created their own worst nightmare by trying to cage a species that had been born to be free. The final approach began, and with it, the moment that would determine the future of human civilization. The void of space had never seemed so crowded as it did in the moments before the confrontation that would reshape the galaxy. 3,000 ships from dozens of worlds hung in perfect formation, their combined mass creating gravitational distortions that bent light itself. At the center of this armada, Fleet Admiral Karn stood in the command center of the Eternal Vigilance, watching displays that showed the most powerful military force ever assembled. His forearms worked frantically across multiple control surfaces as reports streamed in from every section of the massive fleet. The Thulian Republic had contributed their newest dreadnoughts, vessels capable of cracking planets with their main guns. The Corvan Collective had sent their hive ships, each one home to millions of warrior drones. Even the peaceful Altarians had mobilized their defensive fleets, their telepathic crews linked together in networks that could coordinate attacks across vast distances. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, announced the sensor operator, her crystalline form pulsing with rapid bioluminescent patterns. Single vessel approaching at velocity that should be impossible for any known propulsion system. Karn turned his attention to the main display, expecting to see another conventional warship despite the unusual readings. What appeared instead made his blood run cold. The human vessel moved through space like a living thing, its hull rippling with patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his eyes could process. Around it, space itself appeared to bend and flow, as if reality was being rewritten by the ship's mere presence. "Energy readings are off the scale," reported the tactical officer, his voice shaking with barely controlled fear. "The vessel appears to be drawing power from sources we can't identify. It's as if they're tapping directly into the fundamental forces of the universe." The UES Defiant came to a stop exactly 1 million kilometers from the fleet's forward elements, well within range of every weapon system in the Armada. For a moment, nothing happened. The human ship hung in space like a predator studying its prey, its hull continuing to shift and flow in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Then, without warning, every weapon system in the combined fleet simply stopped working, not destroyed, not damaged, not even powered down. They simply ceased to function, as if the very concept of weaponry had been temporarily removed from the universe. Across 3,000 ships, representing dozens of different technological philosophies and countless millennia of military development, every gun, every missile, every energy projector became as useful as decorative art. "Report," Karn screamed, his voice carrying the desperation of a commander who had just watched his entire fleet become helpless in an instant. "All weapon systems are non-responsive," came the reply from the tactical station. "Engineering reports that the hardware is intact, but the systems are not recognizing any command inputs. It's as if they've forgotten how to be weapons." Throughout the fleet, similar reports poured in from every ship. The Corvan hive ships found their warrior drones standing motionless, their programming unable to process the concept of combat. The Thulian dreadnoughts discovered that their planet-cracking guns had become nothing more than expensive sculptures. Even the Altarians, with their advanced telepathic coordination, found themselves unable to even conceptualize aggressive action. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, his entire body trembling with shock, "we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." The main screen flickered to life, showing a human male with graying hair and tired eyes. His uniform was simple, bearing insignia that meant nothing to the alien fleet, but his presence filled the command center with an almost tangible sense of power. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of an entire species behind it. "Admiral Karn, I'm Captain Alex Reed of the UES Defiant. I believe it's time we had a conversation about the future of human-galactic relations." Karn found his voice after several seconds of stunned silence. "What have you done to our ships?" Reed's expression remained calm, but his eyes held depths that seemed to reflect the infinite cosmos. "We've reminded them what they really are. Matter and energy organized by consciousness for a specific purpose. We've simply suggested that they might prefer a different purpose for a while. Your crews are perfectly safe, but I'm afraid your ability to conduct warfare has been temporarily suspended." The implications hit the Admiral like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just developed superior weapons or better defenses. They had reached a level of technological and philosophical advancement that allowed them to rewrite the fundamental rules of reality itself. They had transcended warfare by making it impossible for their enemies to even conceive of violence. "How is this possible?" whispered Commander Toole, Karn's second-in-command, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's systems. Reed seemed to hear the question despite the distance between them. "Your species have spent millennia perfecting the art of destroying each other. Humans spent 20 years in quarantine learning to transcend destruction entirely. We discovered that consciousness itself can be harnessed as a form of energy more powerful than any weapon you can imagine. Across the fleet, crews struggled to understand what had happened to them. The most experienced warriors in the galaxy found themselves unable to even think about combat. Their minds simply refused to process the concept of violence, as if some fundamental aspect of their psychology had been temporarily rewritten. "What do you want from us?" Karn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Reed's expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the man beneath the overwhelming power he commanded. "What we've always wanted, Admiral. To be left alone to develop as we choose, to explore the universe without interference, and to defend ourselves when threatened. The difference is that now we have the ability to ensure these things happen." The fleet that had been assembled to destroy humanity now hung helpless in space, their weapons useless, their crews psychologically unable to comprehend violence. The humans had proven their point without firing a shot, without destroying a single ship, without harming a single being. They had demonstrated that they had evolved beyond the need for conventional warfare. "Your quarantine of our species ends now," Reed continued, his voice carrying the authority of 8 billion human minds linked together in common purpose. "We will take our place in the galaxy as equals, not as prisoners. Any attempt to contain or control us will be met with responses that make today's demonstration look like a gentle suggestion." Admiral Karn looked around his command center at the faces of his crew, seeing his own shock and fear reflected in their expressions. The combined fleet had been humanity's judges and executioners, and instead they had become witnesses to the birth of a new form of existence. "We understand," Karn said quietly, his words carrying the weight of defeat and the beginning of a new era. "The quarantine is ended." The transmission ended, and the human ship began to move away from the fleet. As it did, the weapon systems of every ship slowly began to come back online, their crews remembering how to think about warfare but finding themselves fundamentally changed by the experience. They had seen what lay beyond violence, and that knowledge would stay with them forever. The age of human containment was over, ended not by conquest but by transcendence. The news of the silent defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every major civilization. In the great cities of 1,000 worlds, beings who had never known fear suddenly found themselves confronting the possibility that everything they understood about existence might be wrong. On the crystal spires of Alteria Prime, the telepathic council convened an emergency session. Their shared consciousness, which had made them one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, now seemed primitive compared to what the humans had achieved. Elder Nix, who had witnessed the event firsthand, projected his memories directly into the minds of his fellow council members. "They didn't just disable our weapons," he transmitted, his thoughts carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They temporarily altered the quantum structure of matter itself across a radius of several light years. The humans have learned to manipulate reality at its most fundamental level." The implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy had developed technology by understanding and exploiting the laws of physics. The humans had apparently moved beyond such limitations, reaching a level of development where they could rewrite those laws at will. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for millennia had been shattered in a single encounter. Meanwhile, on Earth, the reaction to the defiant success was complex and profound. The consciousness network that had powered the ship had connected every human to the experience, giving them a direct understanding of what their species had become. President Torres addressed the World Assembly with words that carried the weight of a new era. "We have proven that humanity cannot be caged, limited, or destroyed," she announced to the billions watching around the globe. "But with this power comes a responsibility that we must not take lightly. We are no longer just another species struggling for survival. We have become something unprecedented in the galaxy." The Defiant itself had evolved during the confrontation, Captain Reed reported. that the ship now operated partially on its own, guided by the collective unconscious of humanity itself. The vessel had become a living symbol of human determination, powered by the dreams and fears of an entire species. The ship responds to our intentions before we're even aware of them, Reed explained to the Earth Defense Council. It's as if the boundary between human consciousness and the vessel has become permeable. We're not just operating a ship anymore. We're becoming something larger than the sum of our parts. Back in the halls of the Galactic Council, the emergency session had been running continuously for weeks. Species representatives who had spent centuries debating minor trade agreements were now faced with the need to completely restructure their understanding of reality. The humans had forced them to confront questions that most civilizations had never even thought to ask. Dr. Vala, the galaxy's leading expert on consciousness studies, presented her analysis to the assembled delegates. Her crystalline form pulsed with patterns that indicated both excitement and terror as she shared her findings. The humans have achieved something we believed impossible, she reported, her bioluminescent display creating complex patterns that conveyed meaning across multiple spectrums. They have learned to bootstrap their own evolution. Each generation builds upon the collective knowledge and experience of all previous generations, creating exponential growth in capability. The Corvan delegate, whose species had originally suggested the quarantine, found himself questioning everything his people had believed about the nature of existence. If consciousness can be weaponized, then every assumption we have made about the limits of technology and evolution may be incorrect. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had been allies for millennia found themselves divided over how to respond to humanity's new status. Some argued for immediate accommodation, suggesting that humans should be welcomed into galactic society as equals. Others, primarily the more militaristic species, called for a different approach entirely. The Valaxian representative, whose empire had been instrumental in establishing the original quarantine, stood before the assembly with an expression of deep regret. We created this situation ourselves. We decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to develop freely, and our interference has led to this moment. Perhaps we should consider that we brought this upon ourselves. But fear overrode guilt for many species. The thought of beings who could rewrite reality at will was terrifying enough. The possibility that such beings might hold grudges against those who had imprisoned them was even worse. The turning point came when the humans themselves made an unexpected gesture. Rather than demanding reparations or revenge for their decades of imprisonment, they offered something unprecedented, the chance to share in their discoveries. Captain Reed, now serving as humanity's primary ambassador to the galaxy, addressed the Council directly. We understand your fear. We've spent 20 years learning to transcend the limitations you thought were universal. But we're not interested in conquest or domination. We're interested in growth, in evolution, in becoming something greater than we were. The offer was revolutionary. Humanity was willing to share their consciousness technology with any species that wanted to undergo the fundamental changes necessary to integrate it. The process would be voluntary, irreversible, and would transform the very nature of those who accepted it. We're offering you the chance to become part of something larger, Reed continued. Not to be absorbed or controlled, but to contribute to a collective consciousness that spans species and star systems. Together, we can evolve beyond the limitations that have kept the galaxy stagnant for millennia. The first species to accept the offer were the Altarians, whose natural telepathic abilities made them ideal candidates for consciousness integration. Commander Nix volunteered for the initial trials, becoming the first non-human to directly interface with the human consciousness matrix. The results were immediate and profound. Nix reported that he could not only feel the thoughts and dreams of his own species, but could also sense the vast network of human consciousness that powered the Defiant. The experience was transformative, giving him access to knowledge and perspectives that no individual mind could contain. It's indescribable, Nix told the Council after his first session. I can feel the potential for what we might become, not just as individual species but as a true galactic civilization. The humans haven't just given us new technology. They've shown us a new way of existing. One by one, other species began to consider the offer. The promise of transcending their limitations was tempting, but the price was the fundamental transformation of their nature. They would no longer be the same species that had entered the consciousness network. They would become something new, something unprecedented in galactic history. The galaxy stood at a crossroads, faced with a choice that would determine the future of all life among the stars. The humans had shown them what was possible, but the decision of whether to follow that path would have to be made by each species individually. The age of isolated civilizations was ending, replaced by the possibility of something greater than any single species could achieve alone. 2 years after the silent defeat, the galaxy had transformed into something that the previous generation of beings could never have imagined. The great trade routes that had once connected isolated worlds now carried more than goods and information. They carried consciousness itself, linking distant civilizations in a network of shared thought and experience that spanned the spiral arms of the galaxy. The transformation had not been uniform or immediate. Some species had embraced the consciousness integration process with enthusiasm, while others had chosen to remain independent, watching from the margins as their neighbors evolved into something entirely new. The galaxy had become a patchwork of traditional civilizations and consciousness-linked collectives, each following their own path toward an uncertain future. Admiral Reed, formerly captain of the UES Defiant, now served as the primary coordinator for what had become known as the Consciousness Assembly. The ship that had once been humanity's greatest weapon had evolved into something far more significant, a mobile embassy that could appear anywhere in the galaxy, serving as a bridge between the old order and the new. The integration process is accelerating, reported Dr. Chun during one of their regular briefings. 17 species have now joined the consciousness network, and we're seeing exponential growth and capability across all linked civilizations. The collective knowledge base is expanding faster than we can catalog it. The consciousness network had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Species that had spent millennia developing in isolation were now sharing their discoveries, their philosophies, and their dreams with beings they had never imagined could understand them. The result was a form of evolution that transcended biology, creating new forms of existence that were neither fully organic nor artificial. The Altarians had been the first to fully integrate, and their transformation had been remarkable. Commander Nix, now serving as their representative to the Assembly, had become something that previous generations would have considered impossible, a being that existed simultaneously as an individual and as part of a collective consciousness spanning multiple star systems. We are no longer bound by the limitations of single minds, Nix explained to the assembled representatives. Our thoughts, our creativity, our very existence has become something greater than the sum of our parts. We have not lost our individuality, but we have gained access to perspectives and knowledge that no single species could achieve alone. The Corvan Collective had followed shortly after, their hive mind structure making them natural candidates for consciousness integration. The results had been even more dramatic, as their millions of drones had become nodes in a network that could process information at speeds that approached the theoretical limits of quantum computation. But perhaps the most surprising development had been the response of the more militaristic species. The Thulian Republic, which had initially opposed the consciousness integration process, had eventually requested membership after witnessing the rapid advancement of their neighbors. Their military might, when combined with the collective wisdom of the network, had been transformed from a force of conquest into a guardian system that protected the growing consciousness, civilization from external threats. The galaxy had not been without its holdouts. Several species had chosen to remain independent, either from fear of losing their individual identity or from philosophical objections to the consciousness integration process. These traditional civilizations had been given a choice. They could exist peacefully alongside the consciousness-linked species, Or they could remove themselves from the galactic community entirely. Most had chosen coexistence, recognizing that the new order offered opportunities for growth and development that had never existed before. The consciousness network had become a source of technological advancement, cultural exchange, and scientific discovery that benefited even those who chose not to join it directly. The interesting thing, observed Dr. Vala during one of her reports to the assembly, is that we're seeing the emergence of hybrid civilizations, species that maintain their independence while establishing limited connections to the consciousness network. They're creating new forms of existence that we never anticipated. The implications of this development were profound. The consciousness network had not created a single, homogeneous civilization, but rather a complex ecosystem of interconnected beings that maintained their diversity while sharing their strengths. The galaxy had become a living laboratory for the evolution of consciousness itself. The use-defiant had grown beyond its original design, becoming a vessel that existed as much in the realm of thought as in physical space. Its hull now served as an interface between the consciousness network and the fundamental forces of reality, allowing the linked civilizations to manipulate space and time in ways that had once been considered impossible. We're no longer just exploring the galaxy, Reed reported to the Earth Assembly during one of his rare returns home. We're exploring the nature of existence itself. The consciousness network has given us the ability to ask questions that no single species could have conceived, and to find answers that reshape our understanding of reality. The most significant development had been the discovery that consciousness was not limited to biological beings. The network had begun to exhibit properties that suggested it was developing its own form of awareness, a meta-consciousness that emerged from the interaction of billions of linked minds. This discovery had profound implications for the future of life in the galaxy. We may be witnessing the birth of something entirely new, Dr. Chun explained to the assembly. A form of consciousness that exists at the galactic scale with capabilities that we can barely imagine. The network is becoming more than the sum of its parts. The response to this development had been mixed. Some species saw it as the natural evolution of consciousness, the next step in the development of life in the universe. Others worried about the implications of creating something that might eventually transcend the need for individual beings entirely, but perhaps the most important aspect of the new order was its approach to conflict resolution. The consciousness network had not eliminated disagreement or competition, but it had transformed the way conflicts were resolved. Rather than resorting to warfare or coercion, disputes were now settled through the direct sharing of perspectives and experiences. When you can literally experience another being's point of view, Nix explained, it becomes much harder to maintain positions based on misunderstanding or fear. The network doesn't eliminate conflict, but it makes it impossible to dehumanize your opponents. The galaxy had become a place where war was not just unnecessary, but literally unthinkable for most of its inhabitants. The consciousness network had created a form of civilization where violence was seen as a primitive response to problems that could be better solved through understanding and cooperation. As Reed stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the patterns of consciousness flow across the galaxy like rivers of light, he reflected on how far humanity had come. The species that had once been quarantined for being too dangerous had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. Contact on long-range sensors, reported his tactical officer. A hybrid being whose consciousness contained elements from 7 different species. Unknown configuration approaching from extragalactic space. Reed smiled, recognizing the familiar pattern. Another species was approaching the galaxy, possibly fleeing from some cosmic disaster or simply seeking new opportunities for growth. The consciousness network had protocols for such encounters, developed through the integration of countless different perspectives on first contact. Open a channel and broadcast the standard greeting, Reed ordered, his voice carrying the authority of not just a single ship, but of an entire galactic civilization. The message that went out into the void was simple but profound. This is the Galactic Consciousness Assembly. We are here to help you understand what you truly are and what you might become. Welcome to the next phase of existence. The galaxy had been transformed by humanity's refusal to accept limitations, but the transformation was far from complete. Each new species that joined the network brought fresh perspectives and capabilities, pushing the boundaries of what was possible even further. The age of isolated civilizations struggling for survival was over. The age of conscious evolution had begun, and with it the promise of a future that no single species could have imagined alone.